Hey guys, tonight we settle into the flickering, smoke-tinged quiet of a world long past. You're not in your cozy apartment, and there's no thermostat to nudge up, no heated mattress pad, no glowing phone to scroll. Nope. Tonight, you're a medieval peasant, and it's winter. The kind of winter that makes your eyebrows freeze before your thoughts even finish forming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie there on your back, staring up at a rough, smoky ceiling made of old beams and packed dirt. The air bites your nose. It's colder inside than out somehow. Frost coats the inside of the tiny window like it's trying to enter your lungs. Your breath clouds above you, swirling like mist. It's not just cold, it's soul-sapping, marrow-hollowing. I can't feel my ears kind of cold. You curl tighter into your threadbare wool blanket, more scratch than softness, and pray the pigs don't roll over onto you in their sleep. The mattress beneath you is a bag of lumpy straw. You shift a bit and instantly regret it as a stalk jabs your thigh. There's no memory foam here, no plush pillow top, just a flattened sack of whatever straw you could scavenge before it molded in the barn. Your bed frame? An elevated plank nailed into place, hopefully high enough to avoid the worst of the rats and the absolute worst of the night air. The walls are timber, daubed with wattle and mud, but time and weather have chewed holes through them. Gaps let the night breathe on you. You shiver again and pull the blanket tighter. There's no insulation, no storm windows, no R value, just centuries-old wood and the comforting illusion that dirt counts as defense. But hey, this is just how it is. It's normal. For you. You've grown up with it. Your bones have never known what central heating feels like. And if someone described a warm floor to you, you'd assume they were a liar, a sorcerer, or from Italy. Now, let's paint the room around you. You're in a single-room hut, maybe 15 feet wide, low-ceilinged, and always smelling faintly of smoke and goat. At one end, there's a smoldering hearth. Not roaring, just a few angry embers muttering under ash. Firewood is scarce, and every log is precious. You burn it slowly, wisely, like you're feeding a spoiled dragon. A small clay pot sits on a flat stone nearby, filled with yesterday's porridge or today's melted snow, depending on how desperate the day was. You hear someone shift next to you. Probably your sibling, or your mother, or both. You've all bundled together, not out of affection, though that's in the mix, but because if you don't share warmth, you don't wake up. It's that simple. The family pig, who you've named something endearing, like Buttercup, or Dinner Eventually, grunts softly in her sleep. She's nestled in a hay pile by the wall. She gives off a surprising amount of heat. Honestly, she might be the MVP of the household during January. Outside, the wind howls through the thatch, making the house creak like an old boat in a storm. You can hear branches cracking. A fox yelps. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hoots. An ominous sound, if you're superstitious, which of course you are. Everyone is. This is a world of portents and signs and dreams that mean too much. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages really dreaded nighttime the way we often portray, or if they simply adapted so well, it wasn't as miserable as we imagine. Either way, your nose is frozen and your toes feel like marbles. You'd trade a hen for a heated sock. You remember something the elder said once: if you can see your breath before the rooster crows, it'll be a 3-blanket day. That advice sounded cute until you realized you only own 1 blanket. And it smells like sheep. There's no getting up now, no tiptoeing off to the bathroom or reaching for a midnight snack. Everything's dark, everyone's still, and the floorboards are colder than your conscience after stealing extra turnips. You wiggle your fingers under the blanket and curse your ancestors for not inventing mittens. Then again, this is survivable. You've done it before. You've gotten through worse. Like that winter when the snow came early and the chimney smoked backward and old Jonas got stuck in the privy and no one helped him out for 2 days. That was a bad one. This question mark. This is just Tuesday. A rat scuttles overhead. Or maybe it's just the cat chasing ghosts. The two are usually in league. Now and then, you think about the lords in their stone keeps. Castles sound glamorous until you realize stone is cold. Very cold. In fact, they had tapestries and wall hangings specifically to try and stop the chill from leaking through. That's your one historical fact for the night. Castles were prettier than your hovel, sure, but not much warmer. Still, you imagine what it would be like to wake up in linen sheets, with a fire still glowing, with someone bringing in breakfast instead of just another job to do. But that's not for you. Not yet. Maybe in your next life. For now, you curl deeper into the burlap and pretend the hay isn't poking you in the spleen. Just 5 more hours until sunrise. You can do this. Probably. You wake up, sort of, not because you're rested, but because your nose has gone completely numb and your right ear feels like someone dipped it in icy milk. A chicken has decided to shuffle closer to your feet in the night, which, to be fair, you don't entirely mind. She's warm. A little judgy with those beady eyes, but warm. You blink into the dark. There's no lamp to turn on, no switch to flick, just faint light seeping in from the moon, if you're lucky, and the glow of slowly dying embers in the hearth. You're not alone, of course. There are other shivering, muttering, blanket-wrapped lumps beside you. Some are family. Some might be neighbors. One might be your cousin's new husband, who you're pretty sure never bathes. But hey, at least he's got thick eyebrows that help block the wind. Your stomach growls. You think about food, but there's not much. Supper last night was onion soup again. A humble, steaming bowl of water with boiled onions, a chunk of stale bread if you were lucky, and an optimism that it might somehow fill the yawning pit inside you. It didn't, but you told yourself it did, and that counts for something. You reach to your side and grab what feels like your second tunic. You pull it on over your woolen shift, adding another precious layer. Medieval survival, after all, is a game of layers. You don't have technical fabric, no moisture-wicking thermals, just itchy wool, rough linen, and your own sheer willpower not to freeze into a historical statistic. You fumble for your outer cloak, the one made from patched-up sheep wool and dreams, and wrap it tightly around your shoulders. The edges are frayed. One side smells suspiciously of pickled cabbage, but it traps heat, which is more important than dignity. Let's talk about medieval fashion, just briefly, as a treat. Most peasants wore simple garments, a long tunic or shift, often made of homespun wool or linen, layered for warmth. Men added cloaks, hoods, and heavy boots stuffed with straw. Women wore kirtles or overdresses with aprons and scarves. Socks, if you had them, were rare treasures, usually knitted by someone who had both skill and eyesight. Historians still argue whether most peasants actually had shoes for daily use or just toughened their feet like goats on gravel. And speaking of goats, one sneezes beside you. Bless her. She's pressed close to the hearth, her soft bleating barely audible over the crackling of dying coals. Her breath clouds the air like yours. Animals indoors isn't weird, it's strategy. They give off heat. They're family in their own way. And they help ensure that come morning, you're not the only warm-blooded creature still kicking. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear it rattle the shutters. Thin wooden planks that serve as both window cover and rain deflector. Snow has started, soft and slow, ticking against the roof like 1,000 tiny fingers. You imagine the drifts piling up outside. The way it silences everything. The way it traps you in. There's no going outside tonight. Not for long. But if you had to step out, maybe to fetch a bucket of snow, to melt for water, or to check on the animals in the shed, you'd bundle up like a medieval burrito, layer after layer, tunics, cloaks, hoods. Sometimes, peasants even wrapped cloth around their hands and feet like makeshift gloves and socks. They knew what they were doing, more or less. They'd been cold since birth. Remember? Wool was your best friend. It wasn't soft or luxurious. It didn't make you feel like royalty. But it stayed warm, even when damp. Which is why, despite its constant itch, an uncanny ability to trap every speck of dirt and smoke within a mile radius, it was the fabric of survival. You pull your legs in tighter. The straw under your knees rustles and crunches. You're already dreading the moment you'll have to stand up, peel off the blanket, and step onto that icy dirt floor barefoot. But not yet. Not now. For now, you focus on staying warm. You tuck your hands under your armpits, curl into a tighter ball, and imagine that the cold is a kind of test. One you pass just by not giving up. It's not about being comfortable. It's about making it until the rooster crows. You hear someone stir, a cough, a muttered curse. Then the sound of someone shifting in their blanket pile, maybe looking for a missing sock, or trying to scratch that one eternal itch caused by a combination of fleas, unwashed wool, and revenge from the gods. Did we mention the fleas? Oh yes, they're here, always here. Especially fond of the cozy folds of your cloak. You scratch idly and then stop, hoping they're just cold and sleepy like the rest of you. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Some medieval folks believed that wearing layers of onions around your neck could help ward off colds. You briefly consider whether you should give it a try. You have onions. You're already cold. What's the worst that could happen? Smelling like soup? You sigh. Only a few hours until daylight. Then there'll be chores, animals to feed, water to haul, maybe even a trip to the woods for kindling, if the frost hasn't turned everything into stone. But until then, you stay tucked in your cocoon of wool and onion breath, listening to the slow symphony of a medieval household in winter. Someone farts quietly across the room. A dog growls in response. You don't laugh, not out loud, but you smirk. Just a little. Because if you're going to survive medieval winter, you've got to keep your sense of humor. Even if your socks are frozen solid under the bed. Morning, if you can call it that, arrives not with sunshine, but with a sullen gray glow that leaks through the gaps in the shutters like spilled ash. It's still cold. Brutally so. You've survived the night, but the victory feels hollow when your joints creak like century-old hinges and your fingers refuse to bend properly. You peel back your blanket with the slow reverence of someone unwrapping a particularly vindictive gift. The air that rushes in is sharp, dry, and indifferent to your suffering. You sit up, bones popping, and squint toward the hearth, where the last ember has given up some time before dawn. You missed its final flicker. Treasonous little coal. No fire means no warmth, no heat for porridge, and no way to dry the damp corners of your clothes that always seem to cling like forgotten sins. You rub your arms and reach for your shoes. Leather, if you're lucky, or just thick felt tied with twine if you're not. You're not. They're stiff, cold, and probably still wet from yesterday. Sliding your feet in feels like volunteering to hug two frozen hams. You mutter something under your breath, not quite a curse, not quite a prayer. Maybe just a groan with historical flavor. The others stir around you, equally sluggish, equally miserable. Your brother kicks off a chicken that tried to roost on his chest. Your mother is already fussing with the cooking pot, trying to coax life into a few scraps of dried turnip and whatever edible root dared survive the last frost. You shuffle outside to relieve yourself because, well, let's be honest, there's no bathroom. Just a frostbitten trek to a hole behind the shed that passes for a latrine. The snow crunches underfoot, brittle and unforgiving. The cold finds new places to bite. Your eyes water. Your breath huffs in clouds. You try to go quickly, but can't help pausing to take in the scene. Your little village is a cluster of lopsided roofs, crooked chimneys, and smoke spirals that rise like lazy ghosts. Everything is covered in a film of white. It's quiet, still, like the world has been paused between breaths. There's beauty here, raw, bone-deep beauty, and also frostbite. You pick beauty for about 30 seconds, then scuttle back toward the house. Once inside, someone's managed to spark the hearth again. You feel a flicker of hope. You all huddle around it, elbows tucked in, like peasants in a devotional circle of warmth. Your uncle adds a log the size of a large carrot, which is the most wood you can spare this morning. Firewood, after all, is precious. That brings us to one of the more critical details of your winter life, the firewood economy. You don't have stacks of split logs like some privileged lumber baron. You gather twigs, branches, bark, anything dry enough to burn and not too full of smoke. Some days, you even burn dried animal dung. Yes, truly. You didn't think that croft smelled like daisies, did you? Fringe tidbit of the day. In the colder regions, some peasants made what were called turf blocks, or peat bricks. They dig these chunks of decomposed plant matter from bogs, dry them out, and burn them in place of wood. It smelled earthy, like setting fire to the forest floor after it's had a nap. The fire finally starts licking the bottom of the pot, and the air begins to smell like wet wool and boiled onions. Again. You sip a cup of hot broth, or maybe just warm water with salt if food is tight. It's enough to unstick your throat and bring sensation back to your tongue. The children are awake now, their faces puffy with sleep and cold. They gather near the fire too, clutching wooden cups with both hands like they're holding relics. There's no school today, not because it's a holiday, but because there is no school. Learning is for the monks, the nobles, and sometimes the slightly suspicious neighbor who can read both Latin and clouds. You, however, learn by surviving. You stretch your legs and glance toward the door. It's time to work. No days off in the medieval peasant world. Just colder days with more layers and slower fingers. So you head outside again, bundled like a turnip in a traveling cloak. Your breath leaves little clouds behind you. The wind whistles. Your nose drips. You make your way to the woodpile, which is more like a sad little lean-to sheltering a heap of ambitions. You dig for the driest twigs, fingers already numb. Historians still argue whether peasants in temperate regions were truly so firewood-starved all winter long, or if localized resources gave some villages a bit more comfort than others. But in your case, let's just say the answer is leaning toward not enough trees, too many limbs to warm. You spot a raven watching you from a branch, judging your technique. You consider flipping it off but settle for a glare. He caws anyway, probably telling the other birds you're back at it again with the damp kindling. Eventually, you return inside with your prize, 6 damp sticks and a broken log. Good enough. For now. The fire crackles. The house warms up, slightly. You sit on a low stool, rub your hands, and watch the flame like it might reveal a better life. Not riches, just less freezing. Maybe a second blanket. Maybe a proper breakfast with meat. But you don't complain. Not aloud. Because this is your life, and you've learned how to navigate it. Cold mornings, dull aches, smoky rooms, and all. And besides, complaining takes energy, and energy is something better spent keeping your blood from congealing. You smile faintly as someone hands you a crust of bread, hard enough to threaten dental disaster, but warm from resting near the fire. It tastes like charcoal in heaven. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. A bit late, honestly. You look around at the frost-numb faces of your family, all chewing in silence, all slowly coming back to life. Another day survived. Another winter morning checked off the list. You're doing better than most. You're on your knees in the packed snow, tugging at a bundle of stubborn kindling like it owes you rent. Your fingers, wrapped in strips of cloth that once might have been part of your cousin's tunic, are stiff and red, but the work must be done. It's still early morning, and the chores aren't waiting for the frost to thaw. Behind you, the cottage exhales smoke again, thin, triumphant. Someone finally got the fire steady enough to last. You don't have time to bask in the victory. Not with frozen laundry, empty buckets, and a flock of sheep with the collective attitude of hungover aristocrats waiting for breakfast. Today, you're headed to the well. Or what passes for a well. A stone-lined hole in the earth with a wooden crank, half covered by a crooked lid designed more to discourage squirrels than to prevent freezing. You brace yourself. This is the kind of cold that stings through your teeth. Drawing water in winter is a special kind of medieval punishment. The rope is stiff, the bucket is half frozen, and the winch groans like it's being asked to lift a small castle. But down the pail goes, and when you finally pull it back up, it's sloshing with icy liquid that looks more like melted sorrow than anything drinkable. You cradle the bucket like a newborn and shuffle back home, careful not to spill. Every drop counts, not just for drinking, but for cooking, washing, and keeping the animals from keeling over. You don't waste water, ever. And speaking of animals, it's time for their morning check-in. The barn is half shed, half hopes and prayers. Its walls are thin, its roof leaks, but it's shelter. You duck inside, greeted by a chorus of low moos, clucks, and one goat that insists on making unbroken eye contact while chewing. You feed them from the stores. Some hay, a bit of grain, and whatever scraps survived last night's meal. The animals press in for warmth. You don't mind. Their breath is hot, and their bodies radiate comfort. You lean against the cow briefly, the way you would a radiator if such a thing existed in your time. Here's a mainstream historical fact to mull over while you adjust the feeding trough. In much of medieval Europe, livestock were not kept in distant barns, but shared space with the family in the main living quarters or in attached structures. Not because people were especially fond of cow cuddles, but because it made sense. Animal heat was free heat. And as you've probably gathered by now, heat was life. The chores pile on, manure to shovel, tools to unfreeze, maybe even a trip to the village smithy if your axe head has come loose again. But one thing you must do today is forage for firewood. Again, you're not the only one, of course. The entire village has a sort of unspoken competition going. Who can find the driest, most burnable sticks before the rest of them turn the surrounding woods into kindling dust? And here's where the scholarly arguments come in. Historians still debate how sustainable medieval peasants were with their wood-gathering habits. Some argue that strict forest laws, yes, those were real, limited what common folk could take. Others suggest people mostly used windfall and managed small coppices near their homes, keeping things relatively balanced. The truth likely shifts depending on the century, the kingdom, and whether your local lord was the understanding sort or the hang you for a pinecone sort. Your village falls somewhere in between. You're technically not supposed to chop down anything thicker than your wrist, but if it's on your own land, or no one's watching land, you gather what you can. So you hike into the woods, hood pulled tight, boots crunching, nose dripping. The trees creak around you, brittle with frost. You check fallen branches, break off dry twigs, and add them to the bundle strapped to your back. It's not much, but it might get you through one more evening without resorting to burning your shoes. Again. Now, time for a quirky detail. Some medieval folks believed that the kind of wood you burned affected the mood of your household. Ash was clean and steady, perfect for cooking. Hawthorn was said to crackle with bad luck. Elder wood? Absolutely forbidden. It was believed to house witches or spirits. So if you're superstitious, you check your bundle on the way back, muttering a small apology to the firewood gods and tossing one oddly twisted branch aside, just in case. You return to the cottage with numb toes and a heavy load. The fire welcomes you back with a cheerful hiss, and you feed it the fruits of your labor. The warmth, weak though it is, licks against your skin like forgiveness. The rest of the day unfolds in quiet monotony. You patch a hole in your sock using a bone needle. You help your sibling untangle a frozen fishing net, even though the river is locked under ice. You repair the door latch with a bent nail and a prayer. When the sun dips, the shadows stretch long and blue. The cold returns in waves, seeping through the thatch and gaps in the walls. You stuff rags into the cracks. You light another candle stub. You gather everyone close. Dinner is humble. Porridge with bits of root vegetables. Maybe a pinch of herbs if you're lucky. It's warm at least. You eat slowly, letting the steam hit your face. Your hands cup the bowl like it's a sacred relic. You think about bedtime again. You'll wear everything you own. You'll wrap yourself in every blanket. You'll pile next to your siblings like stacked firewood. You'll sleep, not deeply, not comfortably, but enough. And you'll dream, maybe, of spring, or at least of a slightly warmer winter. Night falls again like a wool blanket dipped in ink, heavy, quiet, and merciless. You know the drill by now. Everything slows. The cold gets meaner. The world outside vanishes into a fog of frost, and your job shifts from getting through the day to surviving another night. You pat around the cottage, double-checking the door latch. You shove another rag into the biggest draft crack in the wall. It's like trying to fix a sinking boat with wet socks, but it's something. Everyone's already gathering near the hearth. You've only got enough wood left for one final burn tonight. You ration it like treasure, feeding the fire one brittle stick at a time, coaxing it to last. It's a delicate dance between too little flame and too much smoke. Smoke clings to everything: your clothes, your skin, your lungs. But heat is heat. You trade one misery for another. Your sister is already curled up on the sleeping bench with a dog tucked behind her knees like a breathing loaf of bread. You eye them jealously. That dog is worth more than 2 blankets. You set out your sleep gear, if you can call it that. A straw mattress that pokes through in patches, a rough wool blanket, a second one if it didn't get soaked in yesterday's snow. And then, of course, your clothes. You won't be taking them off. Not in this weather. You sleep fully dressed, boots and all, because hypothermia doesn't care about hygiene. A quirky little fact for you. Some peasants believed that removing your shoes while sleeping in winter would invite the cold spirits into your feet. Whether that was superstition or just an excuse to avoid cold leather in the morning is anyone's guess. But either way, you're not risking it. Cold spirits have enough of a party going on in your ribs as it is. The fire dims to a gentle glow, and you position yourself close, but not too close. You've seen what happens when someone rolls into the coals mid-sleep. Let's just say singed eyebrows are the best-case scenario. You curl up, knees to chest, trying to shrink your surface area like a human hedgehog. Around you, the room settles. Someone snores. Someone mutters a half-dreamed complaint about turnips. The dog shifts. The wind claws at the shutters like a bored ghost. You close your eyes, and you drift. But the peace doesn't last. Not really. In the early hours, the fire goes out. Again. The cold seeps in like a thief. You wake with aching fingers and a damp chill pressed into your spine. You try to sleep again. You wrap your arms tighter. But sleep is thin when you're battling frostbite in your dreams. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, and you wonder how your ancestors did this for hundreds of years. And your descendants? Will they lounge in heated homes and complain about how cold the floor tiles are in the morning? Probably. The night stretches on. The stars above your roof twinkle unseen. Your breath fogs the air. You count your heartbeats to pass the time. Now here's something historians still argue about: whether peasants' homes in the dead of winter were truly this miserable, or if some were better insulated than we give them credit for. Evidence varies. Wattle and daub walls could be surprisingly effective if maintained. Thatch, if thick enough, could trap a decent amount of warmth. Some homes even had stone floors with built-in drains, keeping the interior less soggy. But for most folks, especially the poorest, well, let's just say the frost was a familiar roommate, and you're not just trying to stay warm tonight. You're trying to stay healthy, because cold wasn't your only enemy. Respiratory infections, rheumatism, chilblains, and winter fevers made their rounds in the tight, smoky, and poorly ventilated homes. You'd be amazed how quickly a cold could escalate when your body's already doing everything it can just to stay above freezing. Still, you get moments of peace, a few quiet stretches of sleep where the body, against all odds, resets itself. And that's something. You wake again, not to sound, but to stillness, the kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes your heartbeat sound loud in your own head. The fire's long gone. The room is gray with early dawn light. Frost feathers the inside of the window pane. You sit up slowly. Every joint complains. You rub your arms. You breathe out a soft curse that melts into fog. You've made it. Another night done. You're still here. Barely. You glance around the room. Others are waking too, rising like cautious hedgehogs from nests of cloth and straw. The air smells faintly of smoke, damp wool, and human resilience. You hear the first footsteps, the rustle of kindling, a kettle being lifted. The fire will be coaxed to life again. The morning gruel will bubble. You'll trudge out into the frost to feed the animals. Again. And the cycle will continue. Because that's what you do. You don't conquer the cold. You outlast it. You step outside just as the sky shifts from ash to pewter. Morning doesn't so much dawn as drag itself up by the elbows. There's no sunrise to speak of, just a faint lightening, like the clouds are thinking about getting out of bed, but haven't had their coffee yet. Your breath curls in front of you in ghostly ribbons. The air is colder than yesterday somehow. Colder than logic, colder than apology. It wraps around you like a damp sheet of metal and bites through your clothes like they're made of excuses. Still, there's no time for dramatics. The animals need feeding, and the path to the barn isn't going to trudge itself. You glance back at the cottage, where the roof wears its crown of frost like a tired king. Smoke begins to snake lazily from the chimney again. Someone beat you to the fire this time. Good. You'll owe them a bowl of the slightly less burned porridge later. You press forward, boots crunching the snow with every step, the sound oddly comforting. Proof you're still moving, still functioning, still more or less alive. The barn door sticks. You have to give it a solid kick, which startles the chickens into a squawking, flapping panic that almost gives you a heart attack. Again. Inside, it's warmer. Not warm, but warmer. The animals huddle close. You move among them like a sleepy, underpaid shepherd. You check the water buckets, chip out the ice, refill them from your precious supply. You lay out feed. And as you do, a thought crosses your mind. How did anyone in this century keep their sanity during winter? Mainstream historians will tell you that, yes, the rhythm of medieval life was seasonal and slow. Winter meant fewer hours of work, more time spent indoors, repairing tools, spinning wool, mending clothes. It was, in some ways, a pause. But let's be real. When you're poor and freezing, it's hard to enjoy your seasonal rest, especially when your ceiling drips and your only entertainment is listening to Uncle Jeff snore like an asthmatic bear. So, how did people pass the time? With stories mostly. You come back into the house mid-morning, and sure enough, someone's already holding court by the hearth, spinning another tale of saints and wolves and improbable miracles involving cabbage. You settle in, cup of hot water in hand. There's no actual tea in it, but you pretend and let the voice wash over you. Medieval peasants loved stories. Oral storytelling was a treasured pastime, and it wasn't all religious sermons and morality plays. Sure, those made the rounds too. But people wanted drama, danger, a little scandal, maybe even a fart joke or two. You hear tales of beasts in the woods, of neighbors turned witches, of knights who definitely weren't as chaste as the church claimed. And here's your quirky tidbit for the day. In some parts of medieval Europe, families told weather magic stories, tales about how to charm the snow to melt faster, or convince the north wind to blow somewhere else. One involved tying a red ribbon to a broom and leaving it facing east. Does it work? Absolutely not. But when your world is frozen solid and your fingers are cracking from the cold, a little hope tied with ribbon is better than nothing. Later, you help your older cousin repair a broken shoe sole. Not because you're particularly good at it, but because it's one of those communal tasks where more hands, even clumsy ones, mean quicker results. The cottage turns into a minor workshop. Wool is spun into yarn. Broken chairs are patched. A knife handle is rewrapped with leather. The dog eats a mitten. There's a strange comfort in all this winter busyness. The pace is slow, but the sense of purpose runs deep. Everything done is done for survival. Nothing is wasted. Every moment is part of the quiet war you wage against the season. The daylight, such as it is, fades early again. By mid-afternoon, it's back to long shadows and blue-tinted frost creeping over the corners of the windows. You step outside to grab one last armload of firewood and stop to admire how the frost sparkles on the fence posts. For just a second, it's beautiful. Cruel, but beautiful. This is when you remember the scholar's argument you heard once. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants viewed winter as punishment or merely as life. The question itself feels strange. When you're in it, really in it, it's not something you label. It just is, like hunger, like breath. You look up at the sky. Thick clouds are moving in, heavier than the usual gloom. Snow's coming. Again, you brace yourself. Back inside, the warmth of the fire greets you like an old friend who never quite got over that thing you said last week. You dry off your boots, shrug out of your outer layers, and sink onto the bench near the hearth with a sigh that escapes your whole body. Dinner tonight is cabbage stew, mostly water, with chunks of something vaguely root-like, and 2 actual pieces of meat that are treated like celebrities. You fish one out and offer it to the smallest child in the house. It's the right thing to do. Also, you weren't sure what kind of meat it was anyway. Afterward, there's more storytelling, more mending, more quietly shivering in layers. The snow begins to fall just after nightfall. Slow, deliberate flakes that pile up like whispered threats. You watch through a slit in the wooden shutter, feeling the cold even with the window closed. And you know, tomorrow you'll have to shovel. The roof might need sweeping. The well could freeze over. The livestock water buckets will freeze over. But that's tomorrow's battle. Tonight, you rest. Sort of. You tuck yourself into the same bundle of blankets, curl up tight, and try to focus on the firelight dancing against the walls. You breathe in smoke, wool, and old wood. And you dream, just for a while, of warmth that doesn't end. You wake before dawn. Again, not because you're rested, but because cold sleep is shallow sleep. It teases you with half dreams, then abandons you like a candle flickering out. Your joints ache as you sit up, and your back feels like it's been mistaken for a chopping block. The cottage is still dark, still cold, still full of softly snoring lumps beneath blankets, sacks, and one stubborn cat. You pull on your cloak, still damp around the edges, and shove your feet into boots stiff with yesterday's snow. You don't even bother tying the laces. What's the point? Outside, the storm delivered. The world is white and silent, smothered under a blanket of snow thick enough to erase paths, fences, and any trace of yesterday. You try to open the door, and it thuds against a drift. Of course. You brace your shoulder and shove. The snow gives reluctantly, like an old man grumbling out of his chair. Welcome to shoveling duty. There's no shovel like we know them today, just a crude wooden spade, slightly warped, that you drag along the path. You carve a trench toward the barn, each scoop of snow heavier than the last. It's back-breaking. It's endless. It's, if we're being honest, a little bit poetic in that absurd, exhausted way. You, fighting winter one stubborn scoop at a time, like a peasant Sisyphus. And as you work, your nose running and your toes going numb again, you remind yourself of something surprisingly modern. Calories. You have none. Or at least, not nearly enough. That bowl of barley mush yesterday and a slice of turnip bread doesn't cut it. Not when your body is burning through fuel like a bonfire just to stay warm. Which brings us to the art of winter eating. You head back inside just before sunrise, cheeks raw, fingers wooden. The smell of morning gruel welcomes you. Smoky, bland, but hot. You sit, cup steaming in your hands, and let it thaw you from the inside out. This is the highlight of your morning. Meals in winter are less about flavor and more about function. You eat what stores haven't spoiled, what hasn't frozen, and what you can stretch as far as possible. Grains, mostly barley and rye, make up the bulk. Porridge, bread, the occasional pottage if you're lucky. It's all filling, even if none of it tastes like celebration. Salted pork is a treat, but rare. It's been hung from the rafters for months, shrinking and hardening into something between meat and memory. You cut off a bit for the stew tonight and try not to cry at the sheer preciousness of it. Sometimes there's cheese, hard and sharp enough to cut a shoe with. Sometimes dried apples or onions. Dried beans, if you didn't eat them all during the fall rush. Occasionally, if the gods are in a generous mood, or your neighbor lost a chicken, you might get eggs. But here's the quirky bit. In some areas, peasants believed that eating garlic every day in winter offended death. It was supposed to ward off illness, especially chest coughs and evil airs. So naturally, you eat garlic. Not because it tastes great on its own, but because you're not above a little superstition if it keeps your lungs from collapsing. You finish your meal, scrape your bowl with the edge of your bread crust, and hand the dish to the youngest child for cleaning. It's his turn, and by cleaning, of course, we mean licking. Outside, the snow's letting up. You and a few others gather to knock the weight off the roof, using long poles to dislodge the heaviest drifts before they crash through the thatch. It's a dangerous game. One wrong swing, and you might be wearing the roof for a hat. While you're up there, you take a breath. Cold, clean, sharp. The sun is rising, pale and unimpressed, but there. It glints off the snow like a warning. Now, historians still argue whether medieval peasants had any form of weather forecasting beyond, ouch, my knee hurts. Some suggest signs in animal behavior, like cows lying down before snow or birds disappearing from the trees. Others believe it was all just guesswork, flavored with a few astrological charts and a side of neighborly speculation. You swear by the rooster. If he won't come outside, you don't either. By midday, chores are well underway. The animals are fed, the cottage patched, a new log split and fed to the hearth. But hunger returns fast in winter. Your body works overtime in this cold. So, time for another meal. A thin stew, mostly broth, with one heroic carrot floating in it like a survivor of shipwreck. Still, there's warmth, there's routine, and there's the quiet miracle of not being alone. As afternoon wanes, a visitor appears. Your neighbor, red-nosed and half buried in a cloak, asking for help with a frozen gate. You agree, because that's how it works. If you don't help today, no one will come when your own barn door jams shut tomorrow. Winter's harshest lesson? You can't go it alone. Not here. By evening, the snow's piled in gentle waves against the walls again, and your muscles ache in places you didn't know you had. But the fire's going. The cottage is full of low voices, some laughter. The dog has forgiven you for that time you sat on his tail. There's even a tiny bit of dried fruit stirred into the porridge for supper, a small, defiant luxury. And tonight, after all the work, after all the cold, after all the snow, you lie down, curl up, and sleep a little deeper, not because it's warm, but because you've earned it. You wake up to a sound you haven't heard in weeks, dripping. Not a leak, though your roof certainly has those too, but the soft, rhythmic sound of water falling from the eaves, landing in the half-frozen mud with tiny splashes. The snow is melting. Well, trying to. You sit up slowly, your body creaking like a door hinge. It's warmer this morning, which in medieval terms means not immediately lethal. Your breath still puffs visibly, but the air doesn't bite quite as hard. A strange softness has crept into the cold. Not comfort, but the suggestion of it. And just like that, hope arrives in the form of slush. You make your way outside, past the heap of cloaks and boots by the door. The snow has retreated a little, revealing patches of brown earth, crooked fence posts, and the occasional half-frozen chicken turd. Still, it feels like a breakthrough. The chickens think so too, already scratching at the ground with a kind of hysterical optimism, as though worms might be waiting just beneath the surface. They're not. They've long since frozen or fled. You grab a broom. Really, just a bundle of twigs tied to a stick, and start sweeping the snow from the cottage eaves and window ledges. It's satisfying work, mostly because it doesn't involve hauling, chopping, or shoveling. You hum as you work, a tune passed down by someone whose name you don't remember. Maybe a lullaby. Maybe a drinking song. It all blurs together in this life. Inside, someone's boiling water again. Tea, if they manage to snag a few dried leaves from the merchant last fall. More likely, it's just hot water with hope stirred in. You sit near the fire, hands outstretched, and sip slowly. And then the plan for the day unfolds. With the weather loosening its grip, it's time for repairs. The ones you've been avoiding because your fingers couldn't handle the cold. First, the fences. You and your cousin head out with tools slung over your backs. A hammer, some nails, precious things, almost never wasted, and a coil of rope. The fence that keeps the goats in, or out, depending on how clever they're feeling, is leaning at an angle that could best be described as optimistically diagonal. You prop it up, lash the joints, wedge new posts into the half-frozen earth. It's not just maintenance, it's morale. When the fences stand, so does your sense of order. A small victory against chaos. Next up, the well. It hasn't frozen solid, thankfully, but the bucket rope snapped last week, and everyone's tired of lowering it by hand. You squat beside the well, hands numb again, working with stiff twine and curse-softened mutters. Finally, with a satisfying creak, the new rope holds. You test it. It draws up water. The crowd cheers. Okay, it's just one person clapping slowly, but still. This is what passes for excitement in a medieval winter. Now for something a bit weirder. You've heard whispers all morning about the midwinter blessing. A local tradition, equal parts pagan echo and Christian patchwork, meant to drive off the lingering chill and bless the hearth. Basically, it involves walking around the house 3 times while singing a chant that no one fully remembers and sprinkling a bit of ale on the threshold. You're skeptical, but when has that ever stopped anyone from participating in community theater? So, just before dusk, you and a few others circle the cottage. Someone drums on an old pot. Someone else sings off key. You sling a splash of beer, well, beer, on the stone step and say a few solemn words, most of which involve hoping the goat doesn't die again this year. It's silly. It's sweet. It's oddly moving. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some English villages, peasants would even bless their tools during these rituals, touching each one with a sprig of evergreen, whispering thanks for surviving the cold. You try it now. You give your shovel a respectful nod. It's earned it. As evening descends, you feel something shift. The cold hasn't gone, but it's thinking about packing up. The sky glows amber for a moment before sliding into its usual slate gray. You see more sky these days. More stars, too, once night falls. After supper, more turnips, always turnips. You sit with the others by the hearth, darning socks, mending sleeves, patching blankets. The fire crackles, spitting embers. You find yourself telling a story from last winter, something about that time the ox got loose and wandered into the church. Everyone laughs, even though they've heard it 10 times. That's not the point. It's not the story. It's the telling. Historians still argue whether peasant winters were full of community bonding or simply endured in silence. Some suggest households rarely spoke during long winter nights, preserving breath and energy. Others believe fireside chatter was constant, loud, familial, and fiercely human. You know where you stand. Silence might preserve breath, but stories preserve hope. You fall asleep that night a little easier. Not because you're warm, not because you're full, but because, for once, things aren't getting worse. And in winter, that's a kind of joy all its own. You curl under the blankets, body tired but not crushed, and listen to the drip, drip, drip of melting snow from the roof. Tomorrow, there will be more mud, more work, maybe even a rooster bold enough to crow again. But tonight, you dream of spring. Morning arrives like a dull drumbeat, not with birdsong or sunshine, but with the squelch of boots in mud and the unmistakable sound of someone slipping and landing in it. You groan sympathetically. Been there. Probably will be there again. The thaw has begun in earnest, and while you might have hoped for gentle meltwater and chirping trees, what you get is a soggy, slushy mess that smells like damp straw, wet fur, and regret. You shuffle out of bed, blankets damp again from breath and dew, and wince as your toes hit the floorboards. They're wet, naturally, because the floor is absorbing all the melted snow from boots, left too close to the fire. You pick your way between puddles, avoiding the mystery socks slumped in the corner like defeated soldiers. Outside, the village is transforming. Snowbanks now slump like forgotten loaves of bread. The roads are ankle-deep in sludge, and what was once a picturesque coating of frost is now 1,000 tiny streams racing toward the fields. But with this mess comes momentum, change, movement. You feel it like a stirring in your ribs. Winter is starting to loosen its bony fingers. First order of the day, cleanup. You, your siblings, and a few groggy neighbors grab rakes, spades, and baskets to begin the annual ritual known, in the tone of someone who deeply resents it, as spring prep. You start with the animal pens. The goats look smug, probably because they've watched you fall in the muck 3 times already. Their straw is soaked and needs to be replaced before mold sets in. You haul it out, flinging clumps of half-frozen manure into the compost heap like it insulted your mother. It's gross. It's heavy. It smells like betrayal. And here's your historical fact. Animal waste wasn't just tolerated, it was treasured. Mixed with straw and composted, it created precious fertilizer for spring planting. In fact, one of the most valuable resources a peasant household could produce in winter wasn't wool or firewood. It was good, old-fashioned dung. You, of course, do not feel particularly rich while ankle-deep in it. Next, the roof. The thatch has suffered under snow weight, and a few patches now droop ominously. You climb up, careful of the slick wood ladder, and begin the delicate dance of rearranging reeds, tightening ropes, and plugging holes with clumps of moss. It's oddly soothing, quiet, rhythmic, even artistic in a lopsided medieval sort of way. You look out over the village from your perch. Chimneys curl lazy smoke into the cold air. Carts creak by, wheels straining in the mud. Children splash through puddles with an enthusiasm that makes you question their sanity. One of them is completely pantsless. No one cares. Back on the ground, you're enlisted to help with the water channels. Those narrow ditches meant to direct meltwater away from homes and into the fields. Only problem, they're clogged with leaves, straw, and last autumn's regrets. You crouch with a stick, poking and scraping until the water finally gurgles through in a rush. There's a moment of satisfaction, watching it clear. Like you've just won a tiny war against the elements. Then you slip and land in the middle of it. Face first. You lie there for a moment, listening to the sound of someone laughing very quietly behind you. Fair. You'd laugh too. You trudge back to the cottage to change. Your second tunic isn't much drier than the first, but it smells less like goats, which is a plus. And you reward yourself with a slice of dried apple saved from the winter stash. It's wrinkled, chewy, and still miraculously sweet. Later that afternoon, the village gathers for one of those events that blurs the line between work and socializing. Mending the road. With the frost retreating, wagon ruts have turned into trenches. Everyone pitches in, laying down gravel, stomping mud into place, even tossing in old bits of cloth to soak up water. It's not elegant, but it works. There's laughter, occasional swearing, a shared flask passed between hands. Someone starts humming a song about a miller's daughter and a regrettable sheep. You don't know the words, but the chorus is catchy. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some regions, villagers would actually plant herbs like thyme or chamomile along well-trodden paths, not just for scent, but because they could take the trampling and added a little cheer to muddy walkways. You consider suggesting it, then remember, you're still dripping mud from your last fall. Maybe next year. Evening falls slowly, with a sky painted in streaks of purple and gold. There's a warmth in the air now. Not physical, not yet, but the kind that settles in your chest. The kind that comes from the first sign of survival turning into recovery. You eat dinner with hands still stained from muck and ash. Tonight, the stew includes lentils. Lentils! You almost tear up. Not because of the food. Okay, maybe a little. But because it's the first time in weeks your belly feels full. You lie in bed that night, the mud rinsed off, your body aching, but your mind oddly clear. You think of the earth softening beneath the snow, of seeds not yet planted, of buds sleeping in the branches. Historians still debate whether peasants truly recognized the slow shift into spring. or whether they simply survived from one hardship to the next. Some say it was too subtle to notice. Others believe moments like today, the drip, the mud, the lentils, were sacred, signs that you'd made it another round in the ring. You pull the blanket tighter, smile into the straw-stuffed pillow, and let yourself believe the latter. You awake to a sky smeared with pale pinks and grays, the dawn creeping in like a cautious visitor. The cold hasn't fully left yet, but there's an unmistakable promise. Today will be warmer. You stretch, your muscles still sore from yesterday, mud wrestling with fate, and prepare yourself for a day that feels less like survival and more like preparation. Out the door, the village stirs with purpose. Winter's grip is loosening, but spring's work is demanding. Today, it's all about seed time, the start of the endless cycle that defines peasant life. Sow, wait, harvest, repeat. You join a small crowd gathered around the common field, the furrows still frozen in places, but thawing enough to be turned. Your hands are raw and cold, but they wield the wooden plow like a weapon against the frozen earth. The farmer leading the group jokes that if the ground doesn't break soon, they'll have to plant the seeds in midair and hope for the best. You laugh, though your teeth chatter in sympathy. Here's a historical fact for you. Medieval peasants depended heavily on crop rotation and fallowing fields to maintain soil fertility. The choices they made during these early planting days would echo in their harvest months later. Good soil management meant survival. Poor management meant hunger. Every seed sown was a gamble. You pause for a moment and glance around at your companions. Faces windburned, eyes narrowed against the chill, but determined. They're the real warriors here, not knights or kings, but people who till the earth with bare hands and hope. Suddenly, a neighbor bursts out laughing. You turn to see a small child clutching a handful of seeds, or what she thinks are seeds. In truth, they're just pebbles she picked up on the way to the field. You smile and shake your head. It's not the first time you've seen hopeful stones masquerading as the promise of food. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasants' relationship to the land was purely practical or tinged with superstition. Some claim peasants believed in seed spirits, or blessed their seeds with chance to ensure a good crop. Others think these were mere folk tales born from later Romanticism. You, however, know better. It was a mix of sweat, superstition, and stubbornness. As the morning slips by, you take a break near the edge of the field. There, a small patch of wild herbs catches your eye. A sprig of thyme, perhaps, or wild garlic poking through the thawing soil. It's a reminder that life persists even in the harshest conditions. You harvest a few to add flavor to your next meal, knowing every bit counts. After all, medieval kitchens rarely had spice racks like yours. These wild herbs were culinary gold. Midday finds you back in the village, seeds pocketed, hands filthy, and spirit lifted by the act of planting. You watch as the plowshares bite into the earth, the soil turning and ready to cradle the new life. It's work, yes, but it feels like hope in motion. That evening, your cottage fills with the scent of herbs simmering in a pot, mingling with the smoky aroma of the hearth. You settle near the fire, warmth seeping into your bones. The day's work behind you, you allow a rare luxury, dreaming. Historians still debate how medieval peasants perceived time, whether their days felt like a continuous struggle, or if moments like these, planting and preparing for spring, offered a psychological reprieve from winter's bleakness. You decide it's the latter, because no matter how cold, muddy, or exhausting, every seed planted carries a whisper of tomorrow. You close your eyes with a faint smile, imagining the shoots that will one day burst forth, green and relentless. You wake with the lingering chill still wrapped around your bones, but today, there's a sharpness in the air, a hint of something new and restless. The snow is nearly gone, save for stubborn patches clinging to shaded corners. The mud has settled into a sticky stew, gluing your boots and temper alike. You step outside, and the village is buzzing with the unmistakable energy of spring cleaning. Not the kind with fancy sprays or cheerful tunes, but the gritty, grimy work of hauling out the winter's refuse. First order of business, clearing out the hearth. This isn't just about shoveling ash, it's a ritual. The fireplace has been your warm heart all winter, but its embers now smolder weakly. You scrape out the cold cinders, careful not to disturb the tiny life forms you suspect have taken up residence. It wouldn't surprise you if a family of mice had claimed the hearth as their winter hotel. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval peasants often believed that ashes had protective powers. Some would sprinkle a handful around the doorstep to ward off evil spirits, while others mixed it into their fields as fertilizer. Ashes were recycled like ancient magic dust. As you clear the hearth, you notice a small charred bundle tucked beneath the hearthstone. Upon closer inspection, it's a sprig of rosemary, a forgotten offering to the fire, likely placed there months ago for luck or protection. You tuck it away, feeling a strange connection to whoever left it. Maybe it was the same person who taught you the midwinter blessing, the one with the ale splash and goat prayers. After the hearth comes the hard work of airing out bedding and blankets. You haul the bundles outside, shaking them vigorously. Dust and bits of straw scatter like tiny stars in the morning light. Your hands sting from the cold wind, but it's worth it. Fresh air is as precious as bread. Historians still argue whether this airing ritual was purely practical or had ritualistic undertones. Some suggest it was believed to purge spirits that accumulated over the long winter. Others think it was simply common sense dressed up in superstition. You suspect it's both. Later, the village gathers to repair tools. Your sickle has seen better days. The blade is dull, the handle cracked. You sit beside the blacksmith's forge, the air thick with heat and the scent of molten metal. Watching sparks fly, you run the blade across a whetstone, trying to remember the blacksmith's instructions on sharpening angles. It's painstaking, but satisfying. There's something deeply comforting about restoring a tool that will soon carve through stalks of barley, cutting a path to the next harvest. The blacksmith tells you a story about how some peasants carried small stones believed to bring good luck before heading into the fields. You smile. Your own version of that is the dull ache in your muscles, proof that you're still here, still fighting. As dusk falls, the village comes alive with chatter. People share news, gossip, and the latest rumors about the upcoming market day. You listen, fascinated by the interplay of hope and hardship threading through every conversation. You settle by the fire, feeling the warmth seep in, and reflect on the layers of winter's end. The practical tasks, the rituals, the shared stories that stitch the community together. You think back to that sprig of rosemary tucked away in your pocket now. It's a small thing, but it carries a world of meaning. And as you drift to sleep, you wonder, Did those ancient herbs and ashes really hold power? Or was it the belief in them that made the difference? Either way, you feel ready. You rise to the sounds of birdsong, a rarity after months of muffled silence. The air is sharper now, alive with the scent of damp earth and blossoming promises. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with a mix of cool morning mist and something green, freshly growing. Today's task is hauling water. Sounds mundane, right? But when you live in a time before taps and plumbing, water is the lifeblood of everything. Drinking, cooking, washing, and most crucially, watering those seeds you planted with fingers numb from cold and hope. You head to the village well, a stone-rimmed hole in the ground, surrounded by a wooden frame creaking under the weight of buckets and ropes. You draw up the first bucket, the cold water shocking your skin as you splash some on your face. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval wells were the village's critical water source, but they were also hotspots for disease. Contamination from nearby latrines or runoff meant that illnesses like cholera and dysentery often spread quickly, something no peasant wanted to think about as they filled their vessels. Still, you're grateful. This water is as close to clean as you can get. You carry the heavy buckets back to your cottage, balancing them carefully, mindful of every precious drop. The journey is muddy and treacherous. One misstep, and you risk soaking yourself again, or worse, losing half your haul. Once inside, you set about boiling some water over the fire to kill any lurking germs. An old peasant trick, passed down from your grandmother's grandmother. Not perfect, but better than nothing. As you tend the fire, you notice a few sprigs of nettle hanging from the rafters. You remember how nettle tea was used as a tonic, a medieval version of a health boost. You make a mental note to brew some later. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed that carrying a piece of iron near the well would protect them from evil water spirits lurking beneath the surface. Others would toss a coin into the well to pay the water's keeper for safe passage. Superstition or early form of water tax? Historians still debate. You ponder the mix of necessity and myth in daily life. For a peasant, survival wasn't just about brute strength, but also about embracing stories, rituals, and practices that offered comfort and a sense of control. Later, you step outside to water the sprouting herbs and seedlings. Each splash of water onto the soil feels like a small victory. Life, you think, is stubborn. The afternoon brings a break for a simple meal. Dark rye bread, a slice of cheese, and some of that nettle tea. The flavors are humble but warming, nourishing both body and spirit. You watch the sun begin its slow descent, casting long shadows across the village. The mud has dried slightly, turning into a thick crust that cracks beneath your feet. As night falls, you lie in your bed, the nettle tea's warmth still spreading through your chest. You think about the water you carried, the seeds you planted, and the rituals that weave through your days like an unseen thread. Historians still debate whether these everyday acts of care were conscious traditions or simply the habits of necessity. You suspect it's both, entwined as tightly as the roots beneath the soil. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you imagine the water flowing quietly beneath the village, unseen but vital. You drift off, cradled by the steady rhythm of life returning to the land. You wake to a dawn wrapped in fog, the village cloaked in a soft silver haze that muffles sounds and blurs edges. It's a perfect morning for one of the more peculiar medieval routines. Spring cleaning. Not just inside your humble cottage, but the entire village preparing to shed winter's last traces. You step outside and immediately notice the smell, a mix of fresh earth, damp straw, and something faintly medicinal. It's the scent of herbal bundles hanging from doorways, garlands woven from lavender, sage, and rue. You remember from last winter's tales how these herbs were believed to ward off illness and evil spirits lingering from the long dark months. You sweep the earthen floor, the bristles of your broom scrubbing away a layer of grime and dust that's collected over many harsh weeks. The straw mats at your feet rattle as you shake them out, sending a cloud of dust motes into the filtered light. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval peasants were meticulous about cleanliness, despite popular misconceptions that they were dirty or unhygienic. They regularly cleaned their homes, swept yards, and changed bedding, partly for comfort, partly out of necessity to stave off pests and disease. But there's a quirky side to this too. Some peasants believed that sweeping after sunset could sweep away their luck or invite bad spirits into the home. So the timing of these chores wasn't just practical, it was a small dance with superstition. Historians still debate how much of these beliefs genuinely influence daily behavior versus being later romanticized by folklore enthusiasts. You, however, take it seriously enough to finish your sweeping before the sun dips too low. After the sweeping, you move outside to the animal pens. The livestock, chickens, a goat or two, maybe a pig, need fresh bedding and a thorough cleaning after months of winter's grime. You replace straw, gather droppings to compost, and whisper gentle reassurances to the animals, who eye you suspiciously but stay put. It's not glamorous work, but it's essential. Dirty pens lead to sick animals, and sick animals mean less food. Your survival hinges on keeping this small ecosystem as healthy as possible. You pause for a moment and notice something odd. A small, crudely carved wooden figure tied to a post in the yard. It looks like a crudely shaped doll, with bits of straw and cloth attached. You recall reading about witch bottles or protective talismans, objects peasants would craft to protect their homes and loved ones from curses or bad luck. You touch the doll lightly, half amused, half curious. Whether magic or superstition, it's a reminder that life was woven through with unseen threads: faith, fear, and hope. Later, you chat with a neighbor who shares rumors about a traveling healer arriving soon. They say she brings strange potions and tales from faraway lands. You listen, skeptical but secretly intrigued. As the day winds down, you reflect on the strange blend of the practical and the mystical that fills your life. You sweep again, this time slower, letting your thoughts drift. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants' rituals were a way to exert control over an unpredictable world or simply expressions of their culture's rich imagination. For now, it's enough to know that every sweep and every charm is a small act of defiance against chaos. You feel a quiet pride in that. You awake to the gentle warmth of sunlight slipping through the cracks in your cottage walls, a welcome change from the biting cold of earlier weeks. The air smells faintly of drying hay and wood smoke. Today, the village gathers for the spring market, an event you've been waiting for since the last harvest. The market is more than a place to trade goods. It's a lifeline, a rare chance to swap stories, news, and those small luxuries that don't grow in the muddy fields or hang from the rafters. As you trudge toward the village square, your boots squelch through soft earth, and the chatter of voices grows louder. Here's a mainstream fact. Medieval markets were vital for peasants, providing access to goods they couldn't produce themselves: spices, cloth, tools, and sometimes even books or religious trinkets. The market also served as a social hub where news and gossip traveled faster than the fastest messenger. You wander through stalls, eyeing woolen scarves, dyed in earthy reds and blues, handmade pottery, and piles of coarse salt. Salt was a precious commodity, not just for flavor, but for preserving meat and fish through the lean months. Your fingers brush over a curious item, a small carved wooden whistle shaped like a bird. You're reminded of the quirky medieval belief that whistles could ward off evil spirits or bad luck. Some peasants carried them not just for music, but as talismans. Historians still argue whether such objects were primarily practical or symbolic. Were they musical instruments or magical tools? Either way, the whistle makes you smile. As you browse, a merchant calls out tales of distant lands, stories of strange creatures, powerful kings, and faraway wars. You listen, half believing, half skeptical, but enjoying the escape. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out near the ale stall. A group of villagers, flushed with laughter and ale, start a raucous game of cock throwing, an old pastime where a rooster is tossed toward a target. The practice sounds cruel now, but back then, it was a festive challenge and a chance to prove strength and skill. You watch, amused, recalling the grim reality of the year's hard work and the rare moments of levity like this that kept spirits alive. As evening falls, you carry home a small bundle of goods: a chunk of cheese, a fresh loaf of bread, and a few sprigs of lavender. The scents mingle, filling your cottage with warmth and comfort. You settle by the fire, feeling the buzz of the day settle into a calm contentment. Historians still debate the true impact of markets on peasant life, whether they empowered communities or simply reinforced existing hardships through taxes and tolls. You decide it doesn't matter much. Today, the market was a reminder that even in the hardest times, connection and joy can be found. And with that thought, you drift into sleep, the whistle tucked safely in your pocket. You wake to a dawn tinged with soft gold, the air warmer now as spring edges closer to summer. The village hums with a quiet energy, a mixture of relief and anticipation. The worst of winter's grip is behind you, but survival here is never guaranteed. Every season brings its own battles. Today is about preparation, readying for the planting season that will decide the village's fate for months to come. You step outside, feeling the sun's tentative warmth on your face. The fields lie before you, muddy but promising. You grab your tools, feeling the familiar weight of the wooden hoe and the rough handle of the spade. Here's a fact: medieval peasants' lives were ruled by the agricultural calendar. Planting was a sacred duty, intertwined with rituals and prayers to ensure a good harvest. Some villages even had ceremonies where farmers would plant their first seeds together, invoking blessings from the earth. You begin to till the soil, the smell of damp earth rising with every turn. It's hard work, your muscles aching from months of little movement. But the rhythm is soothing, almost meditative. You recall the quirky tradition of spring sowing songs, chants and tunes peasants sang to encourage seed growth and keep spirits high. These melodies varied widely by region and often contained coded messages or playful jokes. Historians still debate their origins and true purpose. Were they simply entertainment, or did they hold deeper magical significance? As you work, you notice the buzz of insects beginning to fill the air. the bees and butterflies waking from winter slumber, eager to pollinate the first blooms. You pause to watch a butterfly land delicately on a sprouting weed, its wings flashing in the sun. It's a small miracle, one you savor. Back at the cottage, you prepare a humble meal of pottage, a thick stew made from grains and whatever vegetables are available. The flavors are simple but sustaining, a reminder that survival often meant making do with less. As night falls, you sit by the fire, exhausted but hopeful. The long months of cold and hardship have passed, but the work is far from over. You think about the layers of survival, rituals, hard labor, community, and hope that have carried you this far. The wind outside whispers softly, as if carrying the voices of those who came before, their struggles and triumphs woven into the fabric of this place. Historians still argue over how peasants truly felt about their lives. Were they resigned to hardship or quietly proud of their resilience? You feel both. There's a tough beauty in enduring, a quiet strength in simply surviving. You close your eyes, letting the fire's warmth lull you. And as sleep takes you, you know that no matter what, you've faced the coldest nights and come through. Slowly now, you let your breath deepen, softening the edges of the day's stories. Imagine the village resting, the fields quiet under a blanket of stars. The hardships and rituals you've walked through fade gently, like a lullaby whispered by the wind. Rest here in this calm. The cold nights have passed, and the earth turns toward light and growth. You've carried more than survival. You've carried hope. Now, dim the lights, feel the steady hum of life around you, and drift softly into dreams where warmth and peace await. End of script. Sweet dreams.